So hello, Julie. Thank you for your generosity, giving us your time and energy to do this interview about Vote Online TA Association.
Okay, and thank you, Ashkan, for suggesting that we did this because it's
So,
exciting.
yeah, I'm really proud to do this. Yeah, thank you. So, Julie, I would assume that some people who will be watching this not know so much about your background and want to know a bit more about you. So, would you say some more about your background and work in TA community generally?
Okay, so I've been around with TA since about 1970s. Um, Unfortunately, after Eric Bernard died, but
Mm,
not long after, and I got very hooked and very involved. So I've been ITAA president. I was IATA president before that. Um, and I've done the qualifications. I've done all of the qualifications
yeah.
because it seemed like a fun thing to do. So
Mm,
I've been around a long time with
yeah.
TA.
So now you're TSTA in all four fields.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And also editor in your journal. Could you say
yeah.
a bit about that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I edit the IJTOP, I pronounce it as the International Journal for TA Research and Practice.
Mm,
Started that about 12 years ago. It was started by IATA, but they are no longer involved with that. And it's an open access journal. So
yeah, which is
anybody can
great.
read it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with no
So,
subscriptions or anything.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are also translations of some abstracts.
Yes, there are. Yes. Thanks to lots of volunteers.
Yeah.
When IATA ran it, we used to pay for it to be translated, but they chose only the main languages like German and French, which
Yeah.
um, was still a bit restricted. So since I've done it on my own, I've got lots of volunteers into lots of other
Yeah.
languages. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we publish all those onto, I call it taresearch.org. And
Yeah.
we publish all the abstract translations. And of course, nowadays with Google and other things, it's so easy to translate things anyway.
Yeah.
So if somebody reads the good abstract and they like it, they can translate the whole article. It might be a bit funny, but usually you'll get the meaning.
Yeah. And Google is being smarter every day.
Yes, it
People are
is. Yes.
contributing to, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yes. So my aim is to get all the TA information shared with as many people in this world as I can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Spread it as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you started at some point to make your work online. I want to ask, when did you start doing it and why did you do that?
Yeah, that was interesting when I was thinking about in preparation for this interview. I actually started working online, I think it was about 2015. It was nothing to do with COVID.
Mm,
Um, it was because I'd got international students and they were traveling to the UK for a weekend a
mm,
month. And it just seemed sensible to explore um, the online options like Skype and Zoom and so on.
mm,
Um, so I started to do that. And then I found that even those who were still coming um, were indicating that, well, they would just join the webinar because it was so much easier.
yeah,
And then along came COVID and I was already running webinars. So I just
yeah,
kept on going.
yeah, yeah. So in 2015, you started that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the reasons was it was easier and cheaper for people.
Yeah.
Was it
And
anything else? Yeah.
well, it was more about, in those days, it wasn't so much cheaper because my students were the ones who could actually afford to come to the UK from another country.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, I even had a couple of students at one point from Saudi Arabia, although they did
Oh,
work for an airline, so that made
oh.
a big difference. Um, but it was more about making it more readily accessible. It
Hmm.
was the convenience that you don't spend hours traveling to somewhere.
Yeah. 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 And I'm thinking, especially in some parts of the world, there are no trainers available.
Yeah,
So it's really making it accessible for some countries. Yeah.
yeah. And that was about my own webinars. Um, in the terms of setting up the World Online TA Association,
Hmm.
that came about after COVID had emerged.
Hmm.
I was organizing the World TA Conference in 2020 in the UK.
Hmm.
And that was due to run in the July, and in March, COVID happened.
Yeah.
So that was being run on behalf of 6 or 7 different big TA associations, or big and small. And when that happened, um, they agreed that we ought to organize an online conference just in case. So we started to do that. And then I actually negotiated with the hotel and 300 of the people who booked, that we would postpone the conference for 3 years
Hmm. Hmm.
until it was
Yeah.
all over. But um, apart from the one association that I belong to, all the other associations cancelled the conference. They
Oh.
didn't tell me first, they just announced it was all cancelled. And I thought, well, I've still got the online to run, but then they told everybody they didn't support that either.
Hmm.
Um, so it's like, well, I had all that interest. I had people booking for the online who could never have come to the UK for the official conference.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I was getting much more bookings in. And that's what prompted me to think, okay, well, why don't we have an online association then? If the current associations don't want to be online, why don't we just have a new one? So I set up Wotaa.
Yeah. So at that time, those associations didn't want to support working
Yeah,
online, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
They actually cancelled it and said they didn't have their support. When
Hmm.
they cancelled the online, the problem was all the speakers withdrew. The keynotes first told me,
Oh.
well, I'm not
Hmm.
going to do it. And then other speakers were backing out because, I guess, because they thought it wasn't official anymore. And I
Oh.
thought, well, that's a shame. I'd offered to give it to the 500 who already booked the main conference free. And then I'd got more bookings. So I
Hmm.
thought, oh, that's a shame. So maybe we need an online association because they don't seem to want to do that. They are now doing it more,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
um, the ITAA, the exams have been done brilliantly online. But apart from that, um, you know, it seems like the message is always as soon as we can get back to normal, as they think of it, that's what they'll do.
Hmm.
And they'll stop working online, which is a
Yeah. So
shame.
it's like we're waiting for this situation to end and come back on site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I'm thinking, well, I've been doing this since 2015.
Hmm.
Um, I know that it means it makes TA accessible to people who could never travel and come to other countries to learn it. So why don't we keep doing it? And now that COVID has come along, every cloud has a silver lining.
Yeah.
So, you know, lots of problems with COVID, but it does mean that everybody now thinks about online. I'm aware that there's still probably half the world's population who can't get online. They don't have anything like it. But, you know, maybe somebody will invent something for them eventually, or maybe the technology will spread.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like the focus is more on the drawbacks of working online, and you're
Yeah.
waiting for it to end. Um, Now I want to ask you, what are some benefits of working online? Because you've actually done it for like 6 or 7 years now.
Yeah.
And what was your experience, yeah, in doing it?
Yeah. Well, I'm I made up a term, or I read it somewhere, personal presence privilege. And
Mm,
it's like it defeats that. It defeats the way
yeah,
that some people can afford and live in countries where they're allowed to travel.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it makes it the privileges for anyone as long as they can get online.
Mm,
And I can still remember long before all of this, somebody with a role in ITAA, an important role, being refused access to the USA because of the country they lived in. It's like, well, it
oh,
gets rid of all of that, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah,
It's like me talking to you.
right,
There's
yeah,
difficulties with our governments about whether I visited you or you visited me, but they don't stop
sure,
us talking
sure,
online.
yeah.
So it's this presence privilege that it takes care of,
Mm,
so everybody can join.
mm,
Um, it is cheaper
yeah,
to do because people haven't got their own travel costs, or I haven't got my travel costs if I was going somewhere. And I add to that because when I was president of IATA and ITAA, some colleagues, Jenny and Mervyn Hine, they're both dead now, but
mm,
they gave me this brilliant idea, which I introduced as president, that we should do discounts
mm,
depending on where you lived. And nowadays we've got a website called numbeo.com, which
mhm,
tells you the purchasing power in every country.
yes,
So I always use that to when I'm charging my own services. So
mm,
I give discounts depending on how their purchasing power compares to the purchasing power where I am.
mm,
So I do that as well as running online so that people can then pay
yeah,
what's a reasonable fee for them.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but even so, even if I didn't do that, it's still cheaper because they haven't got the travel costs. And quite often that involved hotel costs as well.
mhm,
Or when I was running the workshops here, it would involve sleeping on my settees or something
mm,
on the floor.
yeah, yeah,
So all of that's taken care of.
mm,
Um, the other thing, there is research that says, this is particularly for therapy online, that there's a disinhibition effect about feelings. There's various research, and I think it's right from my own experiences, that people find it easier to talk about their feelings, especially the deep feelings or feelings they're ashamed about,
mm,
if they're not face to face with you.
Mhm.
I'd already worked out that sometimes if you're on the phone to somebody, or if you lose the camera online, people will tell you more deep things that are worrying them when you can't see them. So
Yeah.
I think there's also an effect there that people feel like they can be more open and honest sometimes online than when they're face to face with you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was talking to one of my friends who is a psychoanalyst, and he was saying that they are trying to make the experience of sitting behind the couch online.
Yeah.
And it was like with turning off the camera. The therapist is
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. Because the whole basis of what they do was the client can't see you.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at what Freud was doing, I know it's the sort of common image, but it's like, well, they lie on a sofa and they're not looking at the therapist.
Mm,
So, well, that must have helped. While otherwise, would you do it?
yeah.
So you can see people online, but also it's not like being face to face. So the client, in the same way that we won't pick up some of the signals, the
Mm,
client also won't pick up some of the signals from us.
mm, mm,
So that means we're going to be less inhibiting to the client.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, a lot of TA is about auditory anyway. You know, drivers, you listen to sentence patterns. Transactions, you can hear what's happening. Um, so it's not a body psychotherapy. You
Mm,
know, we're not usually training people to notice all the details that are going on in the body. We're
yeah.
more interested in how do they make meaning and so on, like constructivist TA. And you don't need to see their whole body to do that.
Mm. Yeah, so but of course, these days now, even body psychotherapists are being more creative how to do
Yeah,
this online. I've
yeah,
seen many, I've been in some workshops. They teach how to do
yeah,
some body work online
sure.
and
Yeah,
teach it with mirroring
yeah,
and these
yeah.
techniques. Yeah.
And we're doing the typical two talking heads, but there would be nothing to stop us sitting further away so we could
To
see the
see the
whole
body.
body. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I guess I tend to work on a laptop, but there would be nothing to stop me if I wanted to do that. I'd get a huge screen
Yeah. Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
I could see everything. Yeah,
To see all the even small
yeah,
signals in the body. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So at this point, I wanted to suggest two of your articles that I found very useful and very
Okay.
helpful to read. I really enjoyed reading it. One of them was working online article
Yeah.
that you published, I think, 2 years ago. So you talked about the stroking patterns online. I would ask you to talk a bit about that as well.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. And let me just say for anyone who's listening, this is in
yeah.
the IDTA newsletter. So it's available to everyone. IDTA makes its newsletter freely available.
Mm,
So I guess on the caption or something of this recording, you could put the website
yeah. Okay. I will.
and they can just have a look at it. Yeah, the stroking patterns is about how the problem with COVID was that people's strokes stopped because we're all used to getting our strokes from talking face to face with people, and
Mhm.
particularly for many of us, hugging, especially with families, but also in the TA community, we tend to do a lot of hugging. Um, So suddenly all of that stopped. And people don't necessarily realize, unless they're trained in TA, that their stroking pattern virtually got cancelled. So they get more and more stressed. So at least if you go online, you're still getting some strokes. You're still getting, Burns said they were units of human recognition.
Yeah.
So you're still getting units of human recognition when you're talking online.
Yeah.
But you have to make the shift to recognize that, okay, you might need a lot more of them online to make up, you know, one hug might count as 20 strokes. So you'd need 20 sentences or something to make up for it. So that helps me explain to people why they're feeling so stressed. I mean, apart from worrying about you might catch COVID and die, but it's more the day-to-day thing, because we've got plenty of other illnesses which you might catch and die. People don't usually get quite so stressed out about that. But part of this stress is because your stroking patterns disappeared overnight, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing, I haven't written it yet, but I'm also looking at one of the difficulties of working online is the idea about group imalgos. The idea in TA is that as you're growing up in your family or in your children's home or wherever, you create an unconscious mental image of what it's like to be in that grouping.
In that group. Yeah.
And then you carry that into any groups you join, which is why when people work in organizations, they often seem to act as if the boss is their parent figure, and their colleagues are their siblings. And what I've realized is that we don't have imalgos that take into account online. So most of the world's population did not grow up talking to people online. So their image is based on they were in a family physically or in a children's home or whatever. And that's how their unconscious imago works. So when you come online, you haven't got one. So you don't feel you know how you are or who you are. What I notice is that I have great-grandchildren and some grandchildren who are younger, and they will end up with imalgos that work online because I had a great-grandchild in Peru, for example, who would talk to me online. So when he's grown up, he wouldn't have had the same problems with COVID because he's used to part of the family members talking online. And a granddaughter who would contact me online as well. So, and now they're learning online at schools. So the next generation won't have the same problem because their group imago will include some of those people are online, some of the family.
Yeah. So it's like they're developing new stroking patterns and new imalgos in a different way.
Yeah. But it means that it's one of the problems for people who go online. They don't know about how their stroking patterns will work online because it's not what they're used to. And they don't have a group imago that helps them feel this is how I'm part of this group.
So your hypothesis is also there is less transference happening online, right? So the people play
Yeah.
less games actually, right?
Well, there would be less transference, although I think sometimes because transference is unconscious, we're not really fussed about the
Yeah,
reality. If we're going
yeah.
to do transference, we're going to do it anyway.
Anyway,
Um,
yeah.
but the games bit is because um, Vanita English said games are failed attempts at intimacy. So to me, if you're not getting enough positive strokes, you go for negative strokes. And the best way, the guaranteed way to get negative strokes is play a game.
Okay. Right.
So if you're very stressed and you're not getting enough human attention, you'll
Mm,
start a game unconsciously because you know that's going to get you big negative strokes.
mm, mm.
So um, it might not mean that you need to be talking to people. Um, I did do an article about the TA myth of explanatory depth, where TA people tend to accuse other people of playing games without recognizing you can't have one person play a game. If you think they're playing a
Ah,
game, you must be playing it. Um,
you're a part of it. Right.
yeah, but you can do that by emails as well.
Mm.
I mean, years ago, we used to do it on fax machines. And before that, we would letters, but it's not the same because letters take so long. Fax machines speeded it up so you could send each other nasty faxes. And now
Mm.
you can send each other nasty emails, and then you
Yeah.
can get online and say the nasty things.
Mm.
So, um, in that way, being online matches being face to face because you can still do an awful lot of gamey negative stroking.
Yeah, so everything can happen, but there's a problem of adapting ourselves to the new
Yeah,
situation of new
yeah,
normal.
yeah.
Right.
And then you think about it, people still seem to get very upset online. So when people argue it's not the same, they seem to forget that, well, people get just as upset and angry and annoyed. So why shouldn't they get just as pleased and happy?
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
they tend to say it's not as good, but then if it doesn't work, how come people get so upset and angry online?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, it's interesting to think about this. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh, so you talked about therapy and group imago. So I want to ask also about learning and your experience in your trainings and how how it might be easier or more difficult for people who are in the training. What did you get from that? Yeah.
yeah. Okay. I think, I guess that depends on how the training is run.
Hmm.
Um, I tend to run online the same as I would face to face, which is I expect an interaction. I don't want to just give a lecture and have
Yeah.
everybody be silent. Um, I would prefer that if they have a question, they interrupt me and ask the question at the time because it makes it a dialogue. That's actually much more interesting for me as well. But I have joined in some other people's webinars
Mm.
and been a bit surprised to see that, okay, often the idea of online is you just listen to somebody else talking for 30 minutes or something. Um, and I think, okay, I'm not sure of the usefulness of that.
Mm. That you can turn off your camera and voice and do anything you want. Do you mean
Well, yes,
that?
if I'm honest, I get a lot more knitting done since we went
Oh,
online.
Mm.
because you can't see what I'm doing down here, can you?
No,
I
no.
can turn off my camera anyway. Um,
Yeah,
and I can still listen and still make notes if I hear something I want to remember. And also, one of the benefits is you can get recordings and listen to it again. And we
yeah,
know
exactly.
that when you reflect on things, you learn a lot more.
Yeah, I usually do that. And
Yeah,
in the second time I listen to it, yeah,
yeah,
lots of more things I get.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I think also sometimes people think there's more learning going on site than there really is.
yeah.
Um, I'm my background was a management trainer,
Mm.
and I can still remember when I caught three senior managers in the back row passing notes to each other like little boys at school. Um,
Right. Yeah.
so I think, we sometimes kid ourselves that because we're standing there, they're paying wonderful attention to us. At
Yeah.
least when you're online, they might not be.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all
Yeah.
interesting. Um, so before I ask you some more about Wotaa, I don't want to forget mentioning this another article I wanted to say. It's the one called a TA-based approach to what happens after lockdown. It's what you published
Okay.
last year. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's in the same newsletter, isn't it?
I think so.
Yes, it
No,
is. Yeah, it is.
is
Yeah.
it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
there's a summary of a book with the title Psychoanalysis and COVID, and there are lots of great ideas in there. Yeah, and some suggestions you made for people with different working styles. How can they work better online? And uh, also a table about levels of discounting.
Yeah.
So it's all very useful, I think, for people. And yeah, just it. So would you say some more about details of Vota? What are some different parts of it, and how can people join? How can they make
Okay.
connections? What are
Okay.
goals of it? Yeah.
Okay. So to join, they can just go to Wotaa, WOTAA.org, and then click on the member tab, and the membership application will come up. The idea is that only members can see other members. So
Mm,
that page is not public. All the other pages are public, but that page isn't, because obviously you'll get so many spam emails and so on if we
yeah.
did that. Um, so you just fill in your details. It asks things like your TA status. Are you just interested right the way through to are you a TSTA? Or I'm gradually building up the other qualifications, because the
Mm,
attitude tends to be in the English speaking world that there's only ITAA and IATA. But of
mm,
course, South America's got their own, India's got some of their own, other countries have got their own. So I'm gradually building up my knowledge about that and
mm,
adjusting the form so that people can tick the appropriate things. Um, and then once you've joined, then you can see everybody else and you can sort in terms of country, language, interests, status,
yeah.
so on.
Yeah.
And also when you join, you say who you'd like to be contacted by.
Mm-hmm.
Most people say anyone, but it is possible to say, I only want to be contacted by people at a certain level or with a certain
Mm-hmm.
interest and so on. And then that's where you are highlighted as an interpreter.
Yeah.
And we've now got two others so far, Turkish and Japanese, I think it is. So every so often, somebody will agree that they're willing to interpret, because obviously not everybody is going to speak the same languages. That's the member page. Then we've got another page, which they're still filling up, but there's a page about qualifications. So I'm hoping that eventually it will show all the different qualifications around the world that you can get in TA.
Yeah.
Then there's one about conferences. Again, the idea would be that all appear in date order and you can see what's coming up. There's one about workshops and events. And then there's one about ongoing TA programs. So that if somebody wants to learn TA, they'll be able to look at that page and see, okay, what programs are running in the languages I need.
Yeah.
With the emphasis on all of those is online. There's nothing to stop people putting on-site things as well. But it's not meant to be just a complete advertising. It's meant to be, okay, let people know what we're running online. And each time I'm asking them to talk about fees and things like that, whether they're working the same system as I am about giving discounts for different countries and so on.
But there is no limitation for trainers that they just come there and put their
they can just put
there.
Their program.
And everybody can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything is free, but we make the point that a donation would be really much appreciated because of course I've got to pay IT costs, website costs.
Yeah.
And the IT has been quite expensive because we've had to have lots of interactive pages. And we're just about going to launch a new page where we're going to list journals. And again, they can be any journals, but the obvious thing is to list online journals. And also we're going to highlight whether they're open access. Because one of the things that bothers me is that the ITAA journal is only available to their 1,200 members or anyone who's in a university that pays for access to the publisher. So it's like, we need to encourage people to write stuff and make it open access so that everyone can read it. A bit like we were talking about the journal. And then the next thing is going to be a page for people to put their groups. So that was partly prompted by you, because I know that you've started a group to share TA with people. So I thought, okay, the next page can be groups. And then people can again look and see what's running in the language I want.
Yeah. So it's very easy for people to find each other, make connections, and see people who are in the same interest as they are, and then make groups.
Yeah. So that's the whole point of it, is like, well, why can't everybody around the world find each other now? The basic idea is you're interested in TA. I don't care whether you're qualified or not. You know, how do you get in touch with other people who like TA and who have the same interests and the same language as you?
And maybe have learning groups for students. And nowadays, groups are getting more international every day.
And there's a mix, because there's programs which are officially running. So that's in a way groups. But the groups page is more for groups of peers, not for trainers or supervisors. They can put their stuff on the programs page, but it's more like somebody, you know, who's a student of TA. I remember when I was first learning TA, I put notices in local shop windows and got people to come to my house on Sundays afternoons, and I taught them all TA so that I could practice. So it would be more things like that, or when groups of students get together and run a peer group.
Yeah. So in my group, we are now starting to have some presentations for public to say how people can help in different fields, and so students can become more active in that.
Yeah. And then they could put those groups up, and who knows if they can do that in their own language as well. So then if somebody searches in a particular language for a TA group, they'll find that website.
Yeah.
So that's a bit like, I had to walk around shops and stick up notices in the windows years and years ago. Now that's the equivalent. You just put that online. And people can find it if they search for the right words.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So that will come next. We're just about finishing off journals, and then we'll start working on groups. It takes a while because I tried paying somebody to do that, and then they decided that they were going to go and do something different with their life, which and that was a learning point, because then they'd done coding, which I don't understand. So somebody who works for me is busily working through the teach yourself coding manuals and trying to work it out. So if anyone wants to volunteer to help us with things like that, we would be delighted to hear from them.
Would be great.
Yeah, but otherwise, hopefully we'll get some donations, and that'll help to pay for it.
For someone else, yeah. So you already talked about some future plans of Wotaa. Is there anything else, and how would you invite people to contribute? How can people help Wotaa and all the plans? I generally, for interpretations, I know there is an invitation for people who like to join and translate the website page for the people in their country or language.
Yeah, because you've done that for one of the pages. And I am very conscious that at the moment we've still got, if people need to know English, because most of the pages are still in English. But I'm hoping that, other language groups will start to do things of their own, and they can still build it around the page. Other ways would be, we can start having a newsletter, so people can start telling me what they're doing so that I can put that into a newsletter. The other thing is telling people about it. Once we've got this interview out, I keep thinking, okay, I must do some more social media about it, but anybody else, because it's how do we get the message out so that people make a lot more entries about conferences and qualifications and so on. I can write holding entries for qualifications that I know about, but I can't do that for all those qualifications that I just don't know about. So anyone who knows anyone who's organizing a conference or running a qualification or even running a program, ask them to make their entries. It doesn't cost them anything. If they can afford it, they can make a donation, but they don't have to. I'm not going to refuse to publish it if they don't pay for it. So that we get it to be a really big collection of all the information.
Okay, that would be great, and it's easy, and more people will know it.
Yeah. And then the bigger it gets, the more people will use it. And then hopefully the ones who don't like online will start thinking again.
Mm. So this goes to my last question I want to ask you, and it's that what are your suggestions for people who haven't worked online, or people who, like me, are students, they want to start their work online, or people who've been working on site and now they want to shift their work to starting in online? What are your suggestions? What can help them in this way? As you started, what were the challenges?
Okay, well, some of the things we've talked about,
Yeah.
if you use TA theory, you'll think about stroking patterns
Mm,
and imalgos. But I guess if somebody was thinking of starting, I'd probably say get some experience first as a student. So, hopefully they've already been attending some
mm,
webinars that,
mm,
and check that you've had experience of interactive ones and not only the ones where the presenter's just telling you their PowerPoint's up and you don't even
mm,
see anybody. But also then I would be thinking, okay, use TA, use working styles, for example, the
mm,
positive end of drivers, and think
mm,
about what's your style, and make sure that you take into account all the other styles.
mm, mm,
So, please people will want to be able to talk to you. Be perfects will want you to get it right. Tryhards will respond to the enthusiasm. Be strongs will be fine because they don't have to join in.
mm.
And hurry ups might struggle if you have to be interpreted.
Yeah. Mm,
Um, but just use your TA knowledge to think, how do I make sure that this takes into account as much as I can other
mm,
people's styles?
mm.
And then I would just say, do it. But that's my working style. I try anything. um,
Yeah.
I remember I'll usually try anything more than once. And my son paid for me to skydive,
Oh.
and I hated it. I get travel sick anyway. So I'm in a plane. I think I'd taken a travel pill, but I still wasn't feeling that good. We jumped out of the plane and the force is like, and I'm smiling because he paid for someone to video how happy I was.
Oh God.
So I'm smiling, thinking, and then we get down and they pull the thing and he starts swinging us. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I'm going to throw up. I'm travel sick. Where do I
Yeah.
throw up to? So we then crashed on the ground and fell over. And then somebody afterwards said, and when are you going to do it again? And I had to confess, no, I wasn't going to do it again. But generally just have a go and see what happens.
Yeah.
That's what I did with TA. I just started teaching it to anybody who'd sit down. And
Mm.
then you learn what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say personally, supervision with you really helped me in some ways to start it and be more creative and flexible for different people in doing it.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be supervision with me. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking,
Anything.
I can only fit so many in, but supervision is the process
Mm.
of somebody else helping you to reflect on what you did.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
really useful. And that's because of one of the secrets of TA is strokes. If you understand about strokes, You can manipulate anyone because you can figure out what strokes they need. But the
Yeah.
second secret is the TA concept of discounting from the shifts.
Mm.
And that's the idea that we don't know what we don't know. So
Mm.
that's why supervision, reflecting in front of somebody else,
Yeah.
especially if they're different enough to you, then they can spot what you discount, what you're not
Mm.
aware of, and they can draw your attention to it.
Mm.
So that's why I think supervision is so valuable, is basically reflecting in front of somebody else who will help you notice what you're discounting.
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes peer supervision is great, but it doesn't work enough. Because
Because
if
you
you're
find
all the
similar people.
students, yeah, you're all students, you're all at the same stage, you're all going to be discounting the same things. So
Mm.
you need somebody who's a bit different. And
Yeah.
then their brain won't work the same as yours, and they can tell you about the discounting. And then you just have to be open and not play yes, but,
Mm.
not tell them that's crazy. Of course, I'm not doing that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why when I do supervision for a group, I do one-to-one, but then I do a process review with the rest of the group. And the other supervisees then help me spot my own discounting
Mm.
because
Right.
they're different. They have a different take. So I get supervised about my supervision.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because of they can spot what I've overlooked or taken for granted.
Yeah. And it's not just supervision with one person, it's with the whole group
Yeah,
of different ideas and everything.
yeah, yeah. So there's a fair chance that in any group, there are going to be some people who are picking up things that I've missed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we all take things for granted, which is what discounting is all about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
Mm,
thank you, Julie.
okay.
I
Well,
think we
thank you
talked
for
about
doing
lots of
this.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's really helpful. I hope that I make a subtitle for my
Yeah.
language, and
Yeah.
it's good, I think, to invite more people to just share this if they think it's useful,
Yeah.
and even make translations or subtitles available
Yeah.
for.
That would be great. And then we can also put it on the website.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and yeah, and encourage other people. Um, And there are systems where they can probably, almost certainly, set up to have it translated for them as they listen to
Mm,
us, or they
yeah,
can translate the captions. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Will be
yeah.
great.
So I'm a great fan of years ago, Star Trek, and I
Mm,
keep waiting for them to invent everything. They had flip phones, and flip phones have come and gone and come back again. But
yeah.
they also had a system whereby you could speak in any language of different planets and it got translated. And we're getting closer and closer to that, aren't we?
We are.
Yeah.
I think there are already some applications on phone that
Yeah,
will translate for you
I know.
everything.
Yeah, I've
Right.
used that in a country when I was talking to somebody and we both spoke to our phones as we looked at each other and our phones said it. So, yeah, the more we get that, the more we can really be a world online TA association and we can all talk
Mm,
to each other.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also I want to say this was the first interview. Maybe there will be more and with more people who are interested to share
Yeah.
some ideas of working online will be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be good. Yeah. Could
Yeah.
be a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So thank you,
Thank you.
Julie.
See
Thank
you.
you. And see you
Okay.
later. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay.